G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on corresponding squares, and today we're doing John Beasley, or John Derek Beasley, his full name. Now, this is a composer I had never heard of until I did my video on Arthur Mandler, and John Beasley wrote a book on his studies, and just sort of I came across him, and he's quite a reasonably recent guy. In fact, he only passed away in 2024. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at a couple of his pawn endgames and analyze them in the context of corresponding squares. And I'm sorry if this video series has turned out to be as much a history of various chess composers as corresponding squares themselves, but it's just an interesting journey. So to capture screen, and we can see there is his page on Aves. Now, I highly recommend that you go to his website. You can see there, J.S. John Sue Beasley website, and it's got a couple of those book I mentioned by Arthur Mandler, but also if you go to the study section, you'll see that it's got all these studies which he sort of curated. This British endgame study news between 1996 and 2010. Click on them, lots of studies to look at. I might go and have a look at some of those. And obviously, really, it's fabulous material like that was prepared by him, and it's still available on the internet. And going back to the Aves page, you can see a brief history and mathematics of games. He's a mathematician, as a lot of the chess players are. So it sort of fits in the model of what we expect a chess player to be. Probably a bit unfair. And then we're going to look at this first position here, and we're going to look. See, he's got quite a few studies. Most of them have this position here. Right, so there's two pawn endgames. They have a very similar idea behind them. Quite interesting. Corresponding squares can be a good way of looking at them. I realise I'm missing some people, so Beasley's over here. He's born near to London, so he fits in with a bit more of a sort of English and sort of the timeline of it. I realise I'm missing a few people here, by the way, but he's certainly of the later set. Born in 1940s, category a bit, but Zena, Haverback, and so on. Those two he would have overlapped with maybe Barr and Sharon a little bit earlier as well, maybe. Calculation is not quite right there, but anyway, you get the sense of where he is. He's not this first wave of the great composers, your Rettys and your Grigorievs and so on. It comes a little bit later than that. And so I've got him as having two compositions. Sure, they're unique. He's obviously using these ideas on corresponding squares and key squares and shortest paths and so on, which became more and more prevalent sort of at the turn of the last century. Go to the position. Looks fairly simple. Two pawns on either side. And this is one of those sort of finely crafted positions. In a lot of places where the black king would be, this would be a draw. Where the black king is, it is not a draw. I think before you go into the simulator and then doing the corresponding squares on it, maybe have a look yourself, see if you can find the winning line. Okay, so let me just get the simulator up. This one's a simpler one because it's 6-piece, works on table base. There, and we want the result of draw, and we want white to move. Okay, so let's just have a look at a few of the squares. Now, this is the interesting thing. I think I made a mistake later on. I called d5 a key square, but it's not, because you can satisfy yourself that if black can take the e pawn at the same time white takes the c pawn, then it's a pawn race and both queen at the same time. So then we look at other squares, which you might think about it. Same issue, actually, if you break through. Okay, so you can see that makes sense now. If you go back to e4 square, basically you either stop access to d5 with the c6 or e6 square, then if we slide across, then you'd slide into those two green squares. Right, so there we go. Now, starting position, you'll see that the issue is that, so these are finely crafted, the black king's in the wrong square. If the black king was on e7 or d7, then he could defend the breakthroughs on the king side, and then of course you flip back and you can stop him from penetrating on through the center as well, right? So that's interesting. And then if you're on g5, not really a relevant square, but g5, you can see that basically as long as you're on the f file or across, you'll be okay. And if you get to f6, essentially, right, at the opposition, then you have to be on e8 or f8, because obviously that's protecting your pawn. And then also you can see that you basically have to stop access to e7 unless you can get to f5. So therefore that rules out the g8 square. So then you look at that and you come back. So if you're on f8, for instance, then you come back and you can slot on e7, and then if we go back, we defend, right? So the problem is we're now starting position, just to sort of wrap all things up, is the clue, right? We'll look at the corresponding squares, the way this work. If we drop back to f4, black still can't get to the square he needs to be to e7. e7, and those other squares covers that route and also covers that route. So he can't be there. Then, so what will happen is that just move back here. If you move back there straight away, that's a mistake. You can't go to e4 straight away because you can hop up to g6. Here, you just step back one. Can't go to g6 in this position because then we step across to e4. You need to be on g6 now. So you move somewhere else, and basically you commit and you end up on the squares. We'll have a look at that when we've got it from a corresponding perspective. So I hope that gives you a bit of the background to the way the everything fits together. So let's start mapping out those corresponding squares. Okay, so that was not quite right. When I was mapping this, I did that as e5 as the key square. It's not quite right. Okay, so let's sort of now go through the place of it. e4, you need about e6. You can also be on g6, as we saw, because you can circle around. And you can also be on c6, but that's not relevant in this formulation of what we're looking at. Okay, so let's now have a look at if you're on square f5, then we saw that you need to be able to reach a square mark 1. Yeah, as we'll see later, go 2. But then you also need a square which is one square away from square mark 1. So for instance, what I'm saying is that white can oscillate between f5 and f4, and both of those access the square 1. Tiny arrow, fix that later. Can we fix it now? I think tool, window, comment editor. We'll see the square mark g6 doesn't work. You can obviously mark squares out 2 and 3, but you end up too far away. You end up on the H file, whichever way you want to do it. And the H file is not not going to work. Right. Let me go to another square. I'm going to call it 6 just because it worked out that way. Square mark 6. So you can access squares mark 1. From the square mark 6, you basically just have to be able to access 2. So one of the squares 6. And then I've got a square mark 4, which allows you to go to 2 or a 3 and a 6. So that will be square there. And I also go with square mark 5, which is also forces you to go g4, g4, and g6 are matched. Okay, so that's the mapping. And if we go to square mark 4 or 5, or even 1, we'll go through the lines. You can see that if we go to e4, I can go g6. We go to g5, I can go to 8, and if we go to g4, black can go to g6. So all those squares come, except square mark 3, 2 or 3. I mean, obviously those interchangeable. Black doesn't have access to those squares because he's on the G file, and the only squares marked 2 and 3 are the ones which are sitting on E7 and D7. So you can see this is just one of those cases where if black was in almost any other starting position, it would be a draw, but he's been put in that nasty position, which looks really close, but it's actually his nasty position, and therefore he cannot draw. So what I might do now is I might go to the game where I save that. Corresponding squares, same thing. Let's just go through a few of the lines to demonstrate exactly what is happening here. Let's have a look. From the starting position, there's actually king f4 is the only winning move, and there's a bunch of other moves. Let's just go through them one by one. We could advance our pawn, and then you don't take because your king's in the wrong spot. Let's just demonstrate that. But if you took, king goes across, and you need to get to that square when we take the pawn, and obviously you can't get there, right? So that's why that move doesn't work. So what you do is you drop back to f8. Very clever move. Yeah. Now you are, for instance, let's say a typical move might be king cross, take, and then now we get to where we need to get to. And the alternative is we push, take, and once again going to be able to get to the c7 square when white takes the c5 pawn. Standard blocking technique. Okay, so go back to starting position again. That was pushing the pawn. Let's have a look at what happens if we go straight to e4. And we hop g6 square, and now to draw. because, as I said, if we go straight for the c pawn, then black will get the e pawn and his pawn race. And then now if we try and backtrack and block, then we're going to have this pawn race concept again. Take it's going to be a draw, push our pawn, move across, pawn. And that'll be a draw, because once again we might, even if we lose that pawn, we'll be able to step onto the c7 square as required. We're going through a few lines here, but it's really interesting about why these different variations don't work. Yeah. And if we go to g4, it's g6, so that only leaves stepping back. And this is where you get the dilemma. Once again, there's a lot of lines here. f6, what happens? We advance, must take, and then now going to cover, so he loses. I mean, king g6 is the most logical looking move. That's the line given in the continuation. But now we go to e4. This time it's with black to move. So black has, the main line is advancing with king to g5. I'll look at that in a sec. What happens if you advance the pawn? It's our pawn, check. Continuation is different here because we can support our pawn. And I think I had that line coded up. You queen with check. That's the difference. So king e4, very clever. And then the main continuation mentions king g5. Can't dive across because, as I said, if we go to d5, black will go to f4 and be a draw. It's the pawn chase. But what you do, clever to see this, push the pawn. And okay, there's two lines here. I've covered the main one, which is pawn takes. But if you drop back with your king, cover it, take. Once again, tempo down. And then if you take, we advance. And what are you going to do now? We're going to take this pawn and you can't block me in that way. Okay, so I think we've covered everything. I think that was very clever. Hope the sort of corresponding squares make sense. And we'll just leave that there. And now we're going to move on to the second position, which wasn't in the thumbnail, but you can see it's slightly more complicated. So I can't use a table base for this one, but I've run it. And let's have a look at the simulator for this and see how the corresponding squares play into this. Have a look at the position first by yourself. You can see that there is an issue there with this black pawn. We should do something about that. And then that sort of gives you a sense of the sorts of moves you should be looking at. Actually, only two realistic moves to look at. One wins and one draws. Okay. Okay, there's the simulator, there's the position. I want white to move and want to be a draw. And look at that. See, very nasty. With white to move, you can see that black can be a lot of squares, but g7 is not one of them. And basically, it's sort of the trade-off between white stopping the black pawn, black being able to stop the two white pawns. Okay, there we go. That sort of gives it away that if you're on e4, black could play f6, king f6 and draw. Doesn't happen in this case because you can see that he would have got to get to e6. Can't get to e6 in one move. And okay, so and then you get some position. If our king gets to there, it's always winning. Basically, you have to stop the white king from getting to some key positions around here. Yeah, obviously we'll pick up the pawn, and that'll be it. So, what's the reality here? If we look at this, I just sort of roll back the method which doesn't work. Step back to e4, we go to f6, back to e3 because we're looping around to pick the pawn. We go to f5 now. Step back. Now you can see, you can quite understand what's working. Black would now win. He would pick up approach the h pawn and take that, and then you can't stop the h pawn and the c pawn, right? So we go back to this position here, back to a draw result. We can block, and then now black would go to e6 and hold. Here, advancing, can still hold, I believe, in this position. But you can see this counterattack on the h pawn more relevant than you would have thought from the original position. And then obviously the winning move is going to be king to f4, where you can't cover. And then depending on where black goes, we step around. This has blocked black from his counterattack. Anyway, so just that's the way the simulator shows it. Let's now go and have a look at it on the board and map out what we think the corresponding squares are. Okay, we've got the position there. Go through this a bit more quickly. I'm just going to go and I've mapped out my corresponding squares already, and we'll just see why this is the case. right? Very, very interesting, this position, actually, right? Takes quite a bit of time to think about how it all fits together. So let's have a look at what doesn't work, and that'll make it clear about what things do work. Okay, so let's have a look at, you can see if we push our pawn, right, what happens in that case? Black pushes his pawn, and we're not going to catch it, and even lose, don't want to do that, right? So let's go to f5. That looks quite logical, right? Apart from the fact the pawn, right? So that's nothing there. So you can see that it's either king to e4 or king to f4. Now, king to e4 looks most natural, but it doesn't work. And we'll have a look at this to the corresponding squares. Let's drop back to e4. Black has to hop onto the f6 square. Now, there's a few lines to look at here. One of them is pushing the pawn. It actually looks quite good because the black pawn in this situation is not really close enough, but push our pawn, white has to go back. We come along and we are going to gobble up those pawns. I mean, even if white does that to try and hold them, we can then break the pawns up in time. And another line might be to hold the pawn and take. We're in front of, that's not promoting, and we'll be able to stop the h pawn. Okay, so right, why in this position we just tried pushing the pawn. Let's try two logical moves. Once again, we've got f4 last move. We'll go to this move now to draw. Have a look what black does. King to e6. Now what are we going to do? It is only one drawing move. Like if we do anything silly like drop back here, black's actually winning because of all the lost pawns. That pawn's going to drop, right? So we'll just be oscillating backwards and forwards forever now, right? Okay. So we go back to this position here, and the other move to try was king back to f3. Right, so I've marked the e6 square as number 4. So what's the difference here? We go back to 1, we go to 1, we go to 2, we go to 2. In fact, there's only one drawing move here, to be honest, as well, once again, because we go to e3, he'll go to d5. We've seen that before. Our pawns will drop. We go back to that in. Push the pawn. You've got to come back. Push the pawn. Come back. I think that'll pick up both the pawns and win the game. Right, so if we go back to this, once we've gone to e4, our only drawing strategy is backwards and forwards, right? Basically based on the penetration, and white's got to keep black off those squares marked 3, and kind of vice versa. So now let's go and have a look at the only one we haven't tried yet. We go to the square marked 2, which black can't get to. Right? Once again, we're just going to try a few of these combinations. It's really interesting, right? What we've mapped out. Okay, I've done a few silly ones, right? Let's go f6. We'll take the opposition. Looks good, right? Now go to square marked 1, and the whole reason why this fails is through different lines. That's the most logical move. d5 check. We will go and scoop up the c pawn and win easily, right? So in this position, black can't actually hold the opposition. Other moves, e7 for instance, d5, same thing. Black's too far away, and we'll pick up the to counterattack our pawns, and we'll pick up the black pawn. Which one did we try there? So that's actually not the most testing line. The most testing line is we'll just do the g6 line, which I've done quite a few variations of. I mean, f6 is also interesting in its own right. Now, once again, only one winning move. If we go to 1, he'll go to 1. If we go to e3 and f5, this is key. We go to e3, black's got to get to f5, and only one drawing move here, actually. If we do anything like king to f3, the pawn runs. So what lines have I got on here? Push the pawn, come across, push the pawn, got to drop back. Seen this line before. d4 is fine as well. b6, break up the pawns. Pawn takes. King takes, then we'll get in front. So any move left realistically is going back to f3, and that is the winning move. Like there's a few choices here. Let's run through all of them. Comes up to f5. In this position, we'll move on to square mark 3. Now what black is going to do, keeps on counterattacking. It doesn't work this time. Now you have to drop back. See, that's trivially winning. So drop back to e6. You can see that this is the problem black has. Black has to answer king to c3, king to d5. He won't be able to. If he goes in there now, we'll win the black pawn. And if he goes somewhere else, then we just move up. And in fact, we've got a tempo square there as well. Okay, so I go back to the very start, and notice this position is quite confusing because those squares marked 3, almost like key squares for black. So we have to make sure that black can't move one of those squares in the way he wanted to. We go the winning line into f4. Most resilient, as we've seen. Move back and move square mark 4, and this is where black hits his problems. So short offensive, we saw attack. Both of those lose. Attack. Push our pawn. Drop back. There we go. Pick up 4. Right. So I think I've kind of looked at them a couple of times. So you go back to the very initial position, and the only winning move is, in fact, in most circumstances, king to f4 and then king to f3, which really mirrors that first position we went through, where it was like dropping back on certain squares is the only way you will win the game. And in fact, white has some very easy ways of losing this position as well. Okay. Anyway, I thought that's the 2 positions by Beasley. I thought they were pretty interesting. Hope you enjoyed watching that, and thank you very much for watching.